share the wins that were happening in all of the churches in this area. So I got to hear some of the wonderful things that God is doing in this area, and it was so encouraging to hear. I have a friend who used to pastor in Boonville, so when I was hearing about what was happening in Boonville with people getting saved, I was crying, so I was getting very emotional hearing what God is doing here. And I know that this is a kind of a rural area, and in Ireland, I serve in a semi-rural area too, so it feels like a similar kind of atmosphere. So that's just what I wanted to say for being here. I'm really excited to be with you guys. And I want to tell you guys about Northern Ireland and what I'm doing there, but first I would love to tell you guys how I came to know Jesus, because I think that's the most important thing, because it's the only reason why I'm in Ireland. And so I grew up in Southern California, and I grew up in a blended family of 5 children from 3 marriages. And we grew up in a secular home. I had never been in a church before. And my parents were both alcoholics from before the time I was born. And I was child number 4 out of 5. With my 4 siblings, my oldest brother and my youngest brother are 20 years apart to the week. Wow. So we are really blended. And one of my brothers is half Filipino. He was born in the Philippines, so that adds to the blend. We have a lot of different things about us, but so because my parents were alcoholics, I spent a lot of the time playing in the street with the neighborhood kids, and I did that because it doesn't feel very safe at home when your parents are either working or drinking. So I was out in the street with the neighborhood kids, and I was playing the next street over, and there were 2 girls that had been adopted from a hard situation, but their grandma still came and visited them every once in a while. She didn't live in our neighborhood, and I lived in a low-income neighborhood that was mostly Mexican immigrants, because we were pretty close to Mexico. And my friend's grandma came outside to us, and she said, "If you guys want to be friends with my granddaughters, then you have to go to church." She said that to all the kids on the street. And I had never been to church before. Most of those children had never been to church before. And that was my first introduction or invitation to church. And I don't know if you guys consider that an invitation. It's more of like a threat, maybe. Yeah, okay. But so she had this little car, and she would take us, and she would fill the car with these 8-year-old girls. We were 8 years old. And there were not enough seatbelts for us, so some of us were in the floorboards. And she would take us to a little Assembly of God church a couple miles down the road on a Wednesday night, and they had something called missionettes. Is anybody in here familiar? Yes. Okay, so for those of you who are not familiar, what I would describe missionettes as is a Christian Girl Scouts. That's kind of what it was. I had done Girl Scouts before that. And instead of selling cookies, you memorize scripture and do a few other things, but you get patches. And so I was going to that church, and then after a little while, that church realized that there were so many children and elderly people in my community that would come to church if there was a way for us to get to church, that they decided that they would take a minibus that they owned, and they would bus us to church every single week. So the church that I had been going to on those Wednesday nights had a Teen Challenge program. So they use the Teen Challenge minibus. Teen Challenge is a program that helps people who are struggling with drug and alcohol abuse work towards freedom from those addictions. And so I started going to church every week. They would pick us up on the bus, and I brought my younger sibling along, and I was going to church every week. And I went to church every week for about a year. And one Sunday morning, the bus was dropping me off at home, and there was a police car, an ambulance, and a fire truck outside my house. And some of my siblings that didn't live with me were also outside my house. And my mom had passed away of an overdose early that morning after a long battle with her depression and her alcoholism. So I quit going to church for a really long time. My dad became a single parent and he worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. For a period of time, I had 3 roommates that I had never met before that had moved into our family's home to help us afford to live in the house. And in middle school, I was bullied, and in high school, I was diagnosed with major depression, anxiety, and I was placed on a medical suicide watch. And going into high school, I had remembered that church that I had gone to when I was a little girl. I hadn't been there since I was 9 years old, but I remembered that church, and that church was the only place I ever really felt peace. It was the only place I ever really felt hope. There were safe adults in that room, and I knew that they had a youth group, and I knew that because when they would take us to the missionettes or girls ministry program, we would walk by the youth room. The youth room had a window in it, and we would peek in and look at all the cool teenagers and dream of the day that we could one day go to the teen youth group. And so I knew they had a youth group, and I decided that I would start going to that youth group. So I started going, and I was running into people that I knew from when I was 8 and 9 years old, and I created some friendships. And I went every single week for almost 4 years. And we got to my senior year of high school, and my youth group was invited to go on a short-term missions trip to Northern Ireland. And they asked me, Christina, do you want to go on this trip? And what I was thinking was, no, I don't want to go on this trip. But Ireland sounds pretty cool. And I wasn't a Christian though. And so I signed up to go on this trip, but I signed up to go on this trip because I didn't want anybody to know that I was planning to take my life the day after I graduated high school. And my trip to Ireland was 2 weeks after I was graduating high school. So I was fundraising to go on this trip. I signed up to go on this trip, but I never thought I was going to go on this trip. I never thought I was going to turn 18. I never thought I was going to go to Ireland. And so my youth pastor knew that I was low income, and my youth pastor had done a really kind thing, and throughout the entire time I was in the youth group, he made sure that the youth group sponsored me for every camp, every retreat, every year. And that was 3 times a year. So I had been sponsored over and over and over again. He made sure the cost was covered, but he knew that I couldn't afford to go on this missions trip, and they knew that I couldn't raise the money all by myself, and my dad wouldn't be able to help me. And so he said, Christina, I want you to do something for me. Can you host the booth every single Sunday, the table, where we fundraise to go to Ireland? And in doing that, that'll help you raise some of your money. So every single week, I'm telling other people about what I'm going to do in Ireland when I have no intention of going to Ireland. And I didn't know that Northern Ireland was even a different country from the Republic of Ireland. So I was making things up every single week. And I thought, well, you know what, I better do a little bit of, maybe the word is investigating. And so I started like Wikipedia-ing the country, going up into the history about it, and I got pretty excited about it. I was like, you know what, I'm putting so much effort into this. My dad's been helping me to get a passport. I'm talking to people about this trip every single week. I might as well go to Ireland, and I'll take my life when I come back. That's what I was thinking. And I'm a pretty practical person. And so that's what I decided I was going to do. And then we got to February of that year. And February of that year, we had winter camp. And this was going to be the last camp I was ever going to go to because I was graduating high school and because I wasn't planning to live for summer camp. And so I went to this camp. And the pastor who was talking at this camp, he was the same pastor who had invited my youth group to come to Northern Ireland. And he was talking about what it meant to be a follower of Jesus. And he was talking about how you don't become a follower of Jesus because it makes your life perfect, because it doesn't. And you don't follow Jesus, for all these random other reasons. And then he said, but when you give your life to Jesus, you're entering into a relationship with a God who knows you inside and out, who loves you, who created you, who has a plan and a purpose for your life. And I connected with that in a way I had never connected with that before. And that camp, had over 500 teenagers at it. And they gave an opportunity for us to give our lives to Jesus. And when they did that, they asked us all to come to the front of the room if we were wanting to give our lives to Jesus. And praise the Lord, the front was completely filled with young people who wanted to do that. And one of the stipulations he had said to us was, if you give your life to Jesus at the front of the altar today, I never want to see you come to the front again to give your life to Jesus, because I see a lot of the same ones every single camp coming to the front. You don't do it every time, you do it one time. And maybe you need to reconnect with the Lord, and we can do that too, but you give your life to him once. And as I said, I'm a pretty practical person, but I'm also a pretty resolute person. Once I've made my mind about something, I've made my mind about something. I don't usually ask people for their opinions or anything like that. And I go down to the front, and I get on my knees to pray, and there weren't enough leaders to pray with us. There were so many kids who were giving their lives to Jesus. And so we just said a prayer by ourselves. He led us in a prayer. He said something on the stage. And I did not know that anybody could give their life to Jesus at any point. I truly thought that somebody had to lead me through in repeating something after them, or they knew something that I didn't know. And so I truly thought this was the only time I could give my life to Jesus. And I came to the front, one of the only times. I came to the front and I prayed. And when I prayed, the Lord completely transformed me. And when I say that, I mean that I was a different person from one moment to the next. And God completely healed me of my depression and my suicidal thoughts. I had been 5 days sober at the time, and I have been depression-free for over 12 years. And there's a Bible verse, 2 Corinthians 5:17 through 21. It says, "This means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone and a new life has begun." And if there's anybody in the room today who is considering becoming a Christian who hasn't before, I want to say that the same thing is available for you. And you don't need somebody else to lead you through a prayer. You can do it anytime, but I'm sure Pastor Eric would love to pray with you. And the next day, at the final service, they had what they called a commissioning service. They said, so many of you guys gave your life to Jesus, and we believe that God is calling you to different things. And some of you, he is called to work in the marketplace, which means it's really fancy language for having a normal job. And then for some of you, he is called to be pastors. And for some of you, he's called to be missionaries. And we're going to list those different things. And when we say one of those things and it connects with you, we want you to stand up, and we're going to pray for everybody who's standing, and then we're going to move on to the next thing. So they were praying for us as we were called to be these different things. So they said missions, and I stood up before I even realized it. I hadn't even, it was like I couldn't control my legs. And I was standing, they prayed for me. And I wasn't really sure what being called to missions looked like, but I knew I was going to Ireland in a couple months. So I thought, maybe that's it. I'll go for 2 weeks. So 4 months later, as a brand new Christian, I went to Northern Ireland for the very first time. And while I was there, God completely transformed my heart for the country. And I knew that the Lord was speaking to me again. And he said to me that I was going to return to that city that I was in. The city was called Derry. And so I was like, okay, great. In the meantime, I'm going to go and I'm going to be a youth leader at my church, because my pastor said to me, Christina, when you come back from Ireland, you're a youth leader. So I was saved for 4 months and 2 weeks. And then I was a youth leader, sharing the gospel with kids at school, with friends. And so I did that for a year. And then the next summer came, and my youth group never went to Ireland again. In fact, that church has never gone back to Ireland. And I started praying, and I was like, Lord, what does it mean that you told me I was going to return to this city? I thought my call to missions was for 2 weeks every summer, or every couple of summers. And I would go to Ireland or some other place. And I did what all really holy people do, and I went on Facebook. And as I was on Facebook, I was scrolling, And everybody does that after they pray, right? And so I was scrolling, and there was a young man that I had met in Ireland who was from Nebraska, and he had gone on the same mission trip that I had gone on, and we had become Facebook friends, and he was talking about how he was doing an internship at the church that we met at in Northern Ireland. And when I read about his internship that he was doing, the Lord spoke to my heart, and he said, that's what I want you to do. I want you to do this internship. I was 1 week into my 3rd semester of community college. I walked into the living room, I said, Dad, I'm dropping out of school, and I'm moving to Ireland. He was not impressed. He said, good luck, I'm not going to help you. Which, okay, fair. And then in January of that year, I did not go back to school. I applied for the internship, and in about 5 months, the Lord helped me raise $12,000 to move and do this internship. $8,000 of that dollars came from one man who had met me one time. The Lord had spoke to him and told him to pay for my internship no matter how much the cost. Wow. And he would cover it, but I had the other $4,000 already raised, so the Lord was so good. And then I had to apply for a visa, and at the time the visa was only on paper, there was no digital applications, and they said that when you apply for a visa, it should take about 6 weeks to come back to you. And so I was like, okay, that's fair. So I filled out my application, but in my application, they were asking me for 3 months worth of bank statements. And I thought, this isn't gonna go very well, because the bank statements are to prove that I have enough money to live in Ireland, but I had no money in my bank account, because everybody who had been helping me fundraise for this year in Ireland had been giving through the church. So all the money was in the church, and the church was gonna send it to the other church in Ireland, and then that's how I was gonna live. Well, so I sent them my 3 months worth of almost $0 in my account bank statements, and I wrote them a letter when I did that on purple paper that had purple butterflies on it with purple ink. And I said something along the lines of, I was 19 by the way, I said something along the lines of, please let me have this visa, I promise I'll have the money when I get to Ireland. And then I sent it by mail to New York City. And it went from California to New York City and back to California in 6 days with my visa inside of it. So 2 weeks later, I moved to Northern Ireland. And I turned 20 that following Sunday. And I served there, and while I was there, I was like, okay, Lord, I guess missions is a year of my life. I'm giving you a year of my life. And I was waiting to meet with my internship director. He was meeting with another intern. He met with the interns. There were 3 of us every single Friday to do a little check-in. And I was the last one he was meeting with that day. And so I was like, okay, Lord, I'm giving you a year of my life. And I felt like the Lord was speaking to me. And he was saying, I don't want a year of your life. I want your whole life. I want you to serve me in missions your whole life. And I was like, God, you could not be talking about me. I'm not really sure if you, maybe you're talking to the wrong person right now. Maybe you've misplaced it. I kind of felt like Moses when Moses was asked to go and tell Pharaoh to let his people go. He's like, but I stutter. And he's like, okay, I'll give you Aaron. God didn't even give me Aaron. So I was like, I'm not so sure you mean me, Lord, and I need a bit of confirmation. So one of the interns walked out of his office. It was my turn to walk in. And the first thing he says to me, it's about 2 minutes from when the Lord said that to me, was, so you're called to missions. And we had never talked about it before. So he had confirmed what the Lord had been saying to me within 2 minutes. I said, yeah, I think so. And he said, because again, I'm not so confident. So I just think so. And he said, okay, let's make a list of everything that you could possibly do at the end of this internship that will propel you towards being a missionary. We need to talk about where you're called to go, all those different kinds of things. So I was like, okay, so we made a list together. And by the end of that year, every single thing was crossed off the list and I couldn't do any of them. I had applied to a couple of Christian universities, and when I got an acceptance letter, the Lord told me to tell them I wasn't going, etc., etc. Everything was crossed off the list, and I felt like the Lord was kind of abandoning me. And there had been been 2 missionary couples that had lived and served at that church, and one of them was an Assembly of God missionary couple from the San Francisco Bay Area. And they had been living there for about 10 years, and they felt like the Lord was calling them back to the San Francisco Bay Area to go and be executive pastors and to work with their father. And on their very last Sunday, their 2 oldest children, they have 5, and I was their youth leader, one of their youth leaders in Ireland, came up to me. They were crying, and they were saying, "I'm so sad that I'm not going to be able to see you anymore." And I said, "Oh, we both live in California. I'm sure I'll see you guys really soon. Go and say bye to other people." And then their mom came over to me. Her name is Laurie, and she said, "Christina, I'm really worried about you and what's going to happen to you. There is one intern, and she's a local girl, and she's going to stay a part of this church, and they're going to look after her. There's another girl who's also from Nebraska, like that other young man I had met, and she just got proposed to. She's going to get married. They're going to go live their life in Nebraska. But for you, I have no idea what's going to happen to you, and I'm really worried." And I thought, thank God somebody else is worried about me, because I'm very worried about me. And what was funny is that we all as interns had a mentor, and she was assigned to the one in Nebraska, so she wasn't even my mentor, and she was worried about me. So the Lord knew what he was doing. And she said, "Well, have you ever considered maybe you could go to School of Urban Missions? It's based in Oakland. At the time it was a Christian Bible college, and maybe you could live with us or something like that." And I was like, wow, okay. And that felt the most right to me out of anything, but I wasn't really sure. I had never heard of the school or anything. So they go back to Ireland, and then a month later they said, "Can we talk to you on Skype?" Because Zoom didn't exist yet. And so I said, "Sure." And they said, "We have a full-time position available in our church as an admin. Would you like to take it?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, we can't promise it to you. You can come up for an interview, but yeah." So I did. I came up, I interviewed, and then I worked at that church in the East Bay for 5 years. And during those 5 years, I was completely set on going back to Ireland. There wasn't a day that I wasn't working towards that. And so for the first year, I only promised them that I would work for them for about a year. And after the first year, I realized I was going to stay a little bit longer. And I felt like the Lord had released me to go back to school at that point. So the first year I didn't do any schooling. I just was trying to get my bearings. And I worked in the church, and I worked in the women's ministry, the media department, prayer ministry, and then I volunteered with youth because I always love youth. And after the first year, I went to Bible college online full-time, and then I turned in my last assignment on my 6th Christian anniversary. And then I applied to become a licensed minister with the Assemblies of God, and I became licensed on my 7th Christian anniversary. And when I had been going to school, my dad had actually passed away. He had been drunk and our house caught on fire, and he didn't make it. And we had been waiting on, we had sold my dad's house after the fire. We had done the work on the fire damage, and then when they were seeing that, they found asbestos, and then they had to gut the house to the beams, completely rebuild the house, and then we were going to sell the house and split it evenly amongst myself and my 4 siblings, because none of us could afford the mortgage, none of us, anything like that. And so we sold the house. My dad had passed in 2016, and it was 2018 now. And we still had not had any sign of receiving this inheritance. And I had applied to become an Assembly of God missionary the week after district council, where they had announced that I was a licensed minister. And they had told me that when you apply, you'll have 90 days, and then you have to leave your job. And I was like, okay, that's okay. And I can do that because they want you to fundraise full time. And I had had a dream the week before that I had been pregnant with my destiny, and that my destiny was serving the Lord in Ireland, and there was a whole bunch of different pieces to it, but 9 months to the day of my dream would have been the 90 days after that interview where I was supposed to go and fundraise. So I was like, this is perfect. Nine whole months from my dream. I'm gonna leave this church. I'm gonna work full-time as a missionary, fundraising, and then I'm gonna go off to Ireland. And so I go to Springfield, Missouri that October, and I've got 90 days before I'm supposed to leave. And they said, actually, would you be a different kind of missionary for your first term? And that kind of missionary, you can keep your job as you fundraise. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I don't really know how that works with my dream. I don't really know how any of this works, but sure, okay, I'll do that. And I felt like the Lord spoke to me and he said, I want you to quit your job anyways. And I want you to live off of your inheritance. And I said, Lord, I don't have my inheritance. How do I live off of something I don't have? And I went to a church service, and it wasn't at the church that I worked at. And there was a man on stage, and he said, there's people in this room who have been waiting on an inheritance from the Lord for the last 2 years. And the Lord says you're going to receive a double portion inheritance.
Wow.
And I said, wow, a spiritual inheritance. Thank you, Lord. And a week before my 8th Christian anniversary, I received my inheritance. I went to the bank to put it into my bank account. They said, you'll have access to this on your 8th Christian anniversary to the day. And I said, okay, great. I put in my notice at my work. And then 2 months later, so it took me 2 years to receive my first inheritance, and then 2 months later, somebody anonymously donated almost the exact amount of my inheritance into my missions account. And it made me fully funded as my first missionary term in Northern Ireland. And I wouldn't have been able to probably raise that money before COVID happened if none of that had happened. So the Lord had completely opened different doors, and if I had been a different kind of missionary, my budget would have been too much for me to raise the money. All those different things worked out. And so I arrived in Northern Ireland again in September 2019, and 6 months before COVID. And I serve in a beautiful little town called Omagh. And Omagh has just over 19,000 people. And Omagh is known for the deadliest bombing in Northern Ireland's history. And 29 people lost their life, and over 200 other people were injured in that bombing. Northern Ireland is 1.8 million people. The whole island of Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, is just over 5 million people. And California has 38 million people. So you have a little bit of the differences there. And I read a statistic that says you can fit the entire island of Ireland into California 6 times.
Wow.
So if you're thinking about the size of it, that's kind of the difference in the size of it. And Omagh is known for that bombing because there was something that happened in Northern Ireland called the Troubles. In 1920, England invaded Ireland, started in the north, worked their way down to about Dublin, and the Irish people fought back and pushed them back up to the north. In 1949, the Republic of Ireland became its own country again, and to this day, Northern Ireland still remains under British rule. And so the Troubles is, some people don't like that. 2/3 of Northern Ireland consider themselves to be British, and 1/3 of Northern Ireland considers themselves to be Irish. And when you talk to people in Northern Ireland who consider themselves to be British or Irish, they actually don't use those words, British and Irish. They use the words Catholic and Protestant. And they do that because all of Ireland had pretty much become Catholic after St. Patrick had come and shared the gospel, and people had gotten saved and become Catholic. And then when the British invaded, they brought Protestantism over. And so it's not I'm Irish or I'm British, it's the Catholics versus the Protestants. And so when you are in Northern Ireland, you'll look at a statistic that says that about 96% of the country is Christian, but that's actually how they vote. So they're saying, I vote as a Catholic or I vote as a Protestant, so we're Christians. So people in Northern Ireland, many of them do have faith, but quite a few actually have no personal relationship with Jesus at all. But they think that they do because they're culturally one thing or culturally another thing. In Northern Ireland, You go to a Protestant school or you go to a Catholic school. You go to you live in a Protestant neighborhood or you live in a Catholic neighborhood. These are kind of the differences. And so in Oma, we have a church called Oma Community Church, and Oma Community Church seeks to break the divide between Catholics and Protestants, because there are things like that, like terrorism, that still is happening today. The most recent terrorist attack in Oma happened this past February. It was 2.5 miles from my house. A police officer was shot at up to 10 times. He was hit 4 times. He survived. And every single political party in the country, there are 5, denounced it. And there was a walk for peace. And then a couple weeks after that, 2 armed men took a guy into his car, at gunpoint, drove him to the police station, and put what looked to be a bomb in his car. Then the whole neighborhood had to evacuate, and it turned out they just did that to bring more fear. So these are the kinds of things that happen in my town and are happening right now. And a lot of people think that Ireland is a beautiful vacation destination, and it is, and I think you should visit. It probably doesn't seem like that exciting right after I just shared all that with you, but I promise you, for people who are visiting, it's very safe. And people think that Ireland is already a place where people have heard the gospel, but actually, in the Republic of Ireland, less than 3% of the country considers themselves to be evangelical. So when you look at the percentages, many people aren't believers at all. And if you compare that with the US, about 30% of people in the US consider themselves to be evangelical. So at Oma Community Church, we seek to break the divide between Catholics and Protestants, and we do that by being a community church where both sides are welcome. So our church is pretty much half Catholic and half Protestant, and that is culturally. And we do different things, like having a community Christmas dinner, and which we've had for 9 years consecutively, and then we also have like a community food bank that we feed our entire town with, anybody who needs it in our entire town. And at our community Christmas dinner last year, we had over 70 people that we fed, and we delivered over 40 meals into our community. And it was on Christmas Day, and we had personalized gifts for every person who came. And then we did a 3 or 4 course meal, and it's on Christmas Day, but one of the things I think is so amazing about that is our church is 25 people on a good Sunday. So we fed 70 people and delivered another 40 through our community. And when I go to my dentist, they asked me where I worked, and I let them know. And they said, oh, the church that feeds the town, through the community center, through our food bank, through our community Christmas dinner. And after I had been in Ireland for 6 months, this time, I was invited by the National Assemblies of God in Ireland, over both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, to be an admin for them. And that is a huge honor for me. And so now I serve in both countries, and I do this with the Bible College on a weekly basis. We had 21 graduates, I believe, 2 years ago, and 18, I think, this past year. And I got to plan their graduation for them and be a part of that. And that is local people across Ireland who are being trained to plant and lead churches in their own communities. And it's from all over Ireland, so that's really cool. And in the last 6 or so months, we've had 3 different churches planted in Ireland. One in Northern Ireland, one in the Republic of Ireland, and one on the border. And some of those people went through that program. And then I was invited also to help them plan conferences and retreats for like pastors. And then I was invited to do my favorite thing, which is I am an admin for the youth ministry to all of Ireland. And the National Youth Director and I have planned 2 youth leader retreats where we were training up youth leaders, because during COVID, almost every youth leader resigned, and that we had to build up new youth leaders. And then we did a digital online conference, and then we have done an in-person camp last summer. And our in-person camp last summer had teenagers from every single region of Ireland. There were over 300 people there, 270 teenagers and then their leaders. And during that week, over 80 teenagers gave their life to Jesus. And God is moving in Ireland. In November, this past November, we did a conference in Dublin City where we had 400 teenagers and their leaders. And we had more give their life to Jesus. And when that happened, a few weeks later, my friend who lives in Belfast, in one of the least safe areas in Northern Ireland, sent us a picture of a young lady, and she said she gave her life to Jesus in November. Here's her getting baptized today. And that's happening across Ireland, and there is it's not escaping me that God would heal me, deliver me, set me free at a youth camp, and then he would use me to plan them for youth of Ireland to experience Jesus in the exact same way.
Works in mysterious ways.
Yes, he does. I am now fundraising as a fully appointed career missionary, and I plan to live a lifetime in Ireland, serving the people there and serving Europe as a whole wherever I can. And I am working towards permanent residency in Northern Ireland. And to do that, I have to raise my budget in less than 180 days. Otherwise, I lose my chance at permanent residency. And right now, I'm just at about 70%, and I've been here for 4 months. So the Lord has been miraculously moving. I believe that God has called me to a life of missions in Europe, and I'm currently working towards permanent residency, as I said. And then my pastor in Oma likes to say that I am a resource to the nation of Ireland.
Hallelujah.
And I couldn't be a resource to the nation of Ireland without the support and prayer of people back home. People like you, would you please pray for me? Would you please pray for Oma? In the back of the room over there, I have prayer cards, and I also have pictures of Oma that I took myself that you can put on your fridge. You don't have to look at me, on the prayer cards. You can look at Oma. But would you pray for Oma with me?
Yes.
The Lord has called us all to share the gospel. And we're supposed to do that. There's this verse that says to share the gospel in Judea, Samaria, Jerusalem, to the ends of the earth. I'm mixing up the locations in the order they're supposed to be in. But essentially, the way that we can do that is we do that locally, right where we are, Redwood Valley. Then if we take the next step, maybe our county. Then we take the next step, maybe our state. We take this next step to the ends of the earth. I'm called to the ends of the earth. Some of you might be called to missions. Maybe that's 2 weeks like I thought. Maybe that's 1 year like I thought. Maybe that's a lifetime. But we're all called to share wherever we are. So I want you to ask the Lord what he's asking you to do. There's 3 different ways that you can partner in that. The first is prayer. Did you know that there are 7 different continents and 7 days in a week? You can pray for missionaries all over the world. The next is giving. You see the missionaries out there, they're on the wall. Give to those people. And then go, your local community, to the ends of the earth. I'm going to read a Bible verse to you guys real quick. 2 of them actually, but it's from Romans chapter 10, verses 13 through 15. And this is for all of us. And it reads, "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. But how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they have never heard about him?
Right.
And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them?
Amen.
And how will anyone go and tell them without being sent? This is why the scriptures say, how beautiful are the feet of messengers who bring the good news."
Amen.
This is a silly question. How beautiful are your feet? Are you sharing the good news? I end with this verse in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 8. "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?' And I said, 'Here I am, send me.'"
Amen. Hallelujah.